All right. Hello and welcome, everyone. My name is Woods Irvin, and I am the Media and Communications Director at Critical Resistance. Um, this past year has included uprisings against policing, surges in creative social distance organizing, fiery grassroots electoral organizing, dogged commitment to community needs through mutual aid and state advocacy. And of course, we've had staggering loss. Today, we will learn from organizers across the country who are fighting against imprisonment, policing, surveillance, immigration criminalization, from each of their vantage points in the abolitionist struggle in order to reflect on the past year and uplift lessons from specific campaigns. So 1 year into the pandemic, we're eager to hear from our comrades and fellow movement builders. What has this past year looked like? What have we accomplished? What did we try? What did we learn? What did we win? And what do we have yet to do? So we're so curious to hear how anti-PIC organizing has developed through the pandemic. We want to hear about the shifts in terrain, both at scales beyond our immediate control and in relation to the impact of our organizing. We want to hear about shifts in strategy. We want to hear about the pivot in tactics. Today, we have with us Bennu, Hannibal, Rassan from the National Freedom Movement, Colby Lentz from the California Coalition for Women Prisoners, Sheila Nazad from Reclaim the Block, Mizue Aizeki from the Immigrant Defense Project, and Hamid Khan from Stop LAPD Spying. Unfortunately, Marlene Ramos from Critical Resistance is not able to be with us today, but if you are RSVP'd for the event, we will be mailing a written update on the CR New York work with Abolish ICE New York, New Jersey Coalition. So here's what to expect today in 1 hour, one and a half hour together. Some framing from me and Critical Resistance about the prison industrial complex, some introductory presentations from our speakers, some questions and discussion. And then if you have any questions out there, please drop them into the chat. Or if you're on Zoom, you can use the Q&A feature. And we'll do our best to get to questions that arise later. If we have time, we'll try and pull out some of the ones that are particularly juicy. So just a note, we do these webinars quarterly to share updates of CR's work in the movement, in a larger movement context. We offer them to our grassroots supporters. So thank you for your work and donations that make this possible. We acknowledge that many of you donated today as part of registering. Thank you, thank you, thank you for making this happen. So, what is the prison industrial complex and why are we having such a range of speakers on this call? CR defines the prison industrial complex as the overlapping interests of government and industry that use surveillance, policing, and imprisonment as solutions to economic, social, and political problems. So we wanted to invite people from a variety of campaigns that are fighting the prison industrial complex from multiple entry points to help share this texture. We know that they can help provide a range of organizing lessons from these different sites of struggle, and we can't wait to hear what they have to share today. A few CR updates. So I'm going to share a few highlights from CR's organizing from 2021, 2020, and 2021. So during the pandemic, critical resistance campaigns have been moving along a variety of fronts. Members have been carrying forward the charge to dismantle the PIC and edge forward the political project of abolition. Our chapters and national work groups identify the most locally or regionally relevant parts of the PIC, prison industrial complex, and design or join campaigns and projects to fight for their abolition. So some campaign milestones this past year include, but are not limited to, CR Oakland and the Nonu SF jail shut down 850 victory. So after 3 years of campaigning to shut down 850, CR Oakland and the Nonu San Francisco Jail Coalition permanently shut down the notorious 850 Bryant Jail in San Francisco, California. Brilliant, amazing. CR Oakland has been part of this coalition since its founding in 2013, working on outreach, media, and legislative strategies. We are so humbled to celebrate this victory in 2020. And CR Portland and the Care Not Cops victory, after 3 years of anti-policing budget organizing, CRPDX and Care Not Cops won the dismantling of the anti-gang policing unit in Portland, Oregon. The anti-policing momentum in Portland also resulted in allies dismantling transit police and school officers in the city. CRPDX/Portland and Care Not Cops have been organizing to defund the Portland Police Bureau and redirect money into community-based resources since 2017. And if you want to learn more about CR's work, more info is in our annual report, which was released yesterday, and you can find that link in the chat. A few project accomplishments. We were able to assemble a national network of organizations dedicated to advance abolition with us. That's called Abolition Now, and some of our speakers are part of that network. We were able to release an abolish policing toolkit in order to share campaign strategies, anti-policing organizing lessons, and key political principles. This past summer, we were able to support movement partners, Dream Defenders, Sunrise Movement, and BYP 100 in training over 5,000 young people in anti-policing and prison industrial complex abolition fundamentals. We've released 3 new issues of our newspaper, The Abolitionist, whose primary audience is over 4,500 imprisoned people, in order to support continued connection and political education with people behind walls at this crucial time. In Washington State, we were able to distribute over 10,000 CARES Act stimulus checks applications to imprisoned people so that they could access financial resources during this crisis. We were able to distribute over $6,000 in mutual aid to community members in need, in addition to $60,000 in mutual aid heading to imprisoned firefighters in Oregon. Again, much of what I covered is in our annual report released yesterday. Okay, so now we're going to get into it. So I'm going to move us through each of the speakers, and you'll give us a little intro of the work that you're doing and your organization, and a little bit about the last year. Okay, so I'll start us off with Bennu.
Okay, I'm ready.
All right, go for it.
My name is Bennu Hannibal Rassan. I'm a human rights activist and organizer inside the Alabama Department of Corrections. My organizations are Free Alabama Movement and the National Freedom Movement, and we've been organizing. Our work is to save lives. You know, there are so many different topics that people use around this work, whether it's reform, whether it's abolition or whatever, you know, and we respect all of those. And our priority on the ground is, as I said, is to save lives. We deal with these human rights issues from the perspective of this is a humanitarian crisis. Many people are aware of the pandemic as it relates to COVID-19, but there were already epidemics inside of the prison that were claiming lives every day as a result of government policies and laws. Many people are already familiar with war on drugs, the policies and politics that came out of that. We fight those in real time. We fight those in real life circumstances. Um, some of the things we've done over the past year, we've organized PPE drives to get resources to the inside. We've organized around laws that were not being applied that had the potential to release people, mandatory release laws, and we partner with other organizations to apply pressure to get people out. We also identify weaknesses in the parole structure, not just in the state of Alabama, but nationally. And we started advocating for parole changes. Most particularly, we want to see the federal parole reinstated. We want to see federal parole reinstated. We're also looking for a mandatory parole criteria to be implemented by the federal government and for them to use the power of the purse to force states to comply with that, because we have to create pathways to freedom for people on the inside. We all know that the end goal is to abolish this thing, but before we get to that point, we have to do whatever we can and work these processes that are available to us to allow us to liberate people from these cages. So that's just an overview of what we've had going on so far. I didn't know if you wanted to ask a few questions or if you wanted me to just talk about some of the questions that you have presented. How do we proceed?
Oh, that's what you just shared was perfect, Bennu. We're going to come back around to the questions. I'm just going to move through the other speakers and we'll come back around. Thank you so much for sharing. And now I will pass it over to Colby from the California Coalition for Women Prisoners.
Thanks so much, Woods. I think I'm going to start with a really short 1-minute video clip that Jess is going to play for us. And I will just say, while Jess cues that up, that the California Coalition for Women Prisoners is an organization that started 25 years ago by people in the women's prisons organizing against healthcare abuses and looking for support on the outside. So it's an inside-outside organizing method that we use for survival and release. So it looks like Jess is ready.
Sorry, folks. I forgot to do the share audio option. Starting again.
Thanks, Jess.
yourself locked in a concrete box, having to depend on the people to open your door if there's a fire or a flood or some other catastrophe like friggin' COVID-19. They are stuck.
Instead of cared for because they think you may have COVID, you are being isolated from not everyone but your family, no contact whatsoever. Ridiculous because you brought it in.
Paying your debt to society is one thing, but being lynched by way of civil death is a whole nother issue.
If you can't at least care for them minimally, set them all free. We got them. Set them free.
Care for our people. We know what they need. And as far as Governor Newsom goes, lifers have a less than 1% recidivism. Why are you turning their life sentences into a death sentence? Let them go!
We're talking about specialists. We're talking about scientists are telling us the only way to mitigate the spread of this pandemic is to release inmates now.
My father's hand, my father's blood is on your hands. My husband's blood is on your hands. I have the emails right here. We're in all capital letters. They are saying, please help us.
Thank you, Jess. That was a short video clip made by Chisa Hughes, another CCWP member on our media team, which is some of the work that we really amped up during COVID. And that protest was last summer at the Capitol in California, organized by a really broad coalition of groups working with incarcerated people, mostly formerly incarcerated people and family members of loved ones inside, in coordination with people inside, to continue to demand emergency releases at our state capitol here, and to honor the lives of those lost during that period of time. So at that point, we had 54 people who were kind of officially recorded as dying from COVID within the prison system. And now it's over 220 people in California. And of course, that doesn't include jails and immigration prisons. So the number is, quite a bit higher than that if we include all forms of cages in California. But I wanted to show that clip to give a sense of some of the organizing that's been happening in California, which is of course an extension of the organizing that's been happening for decades, but has been very amped up during COVID. And I'll just say for CCWP in particular, on a similar line, our work is, survival and release work. And so, and our method is through relationship building, inside out organizing and advocacy. And so we were, kind of in a good position in a horrible time of supporting, getting the word out about conditions inside, and doing the kind of amped up release work for pushing for mass releases, for emergency releases, and including those who are sentenced to the most extreme sentences, including life without parole, life sentences and the death penalty. So a lot of our work, was just amping up the work we were already doing under the extra level extreme conditions of COVID inside. And a lot of a turn in our work was doing more media advocacy. And in particular, we saw, and I think helped collectively with all the different organizations in California, push a shift in media in California during this time, where we had the most direct representation of incarcerated people centered in mainstream media, talking about the conditions inside and the need for releases. And so that was something that I think was forced through organizing inside and out by many, many groups. And I think we'll get into more later, but I think the other thing that we did was, try to increase broad public support, pushing for mass releases and emergency releases. So, constant both online and in-person actions to demand releases, to put pressure on the need for releases by also exposing the ongoing conditions inside, including in COVID quarantine, where people were being denied water, medical care, communication to the outside, just, extremely egregious conditions. and trying to create as many opportunities as possible for people living and trying to survive through those conditions and grieving the loss of friends inside to speak out directly to the public. And so I think, we have achieved more releases, in particular for elderly members and medically, very highly vulnerable members of CCWP who are incarcerated during this time. And through that have, both grown our base through the organizing for mass releases, have grown our base on the inside and out through, a time of so much despair and high level crisis and honestly just desperation. So I think the increased coalition work and the kind of forced exposure of the crisis of prisons, not just during COVID, but also during COVID and ongoing, exposing prisons as deadly in and of themselves, and trying to make the connections as well to how policing, we need to abolish prisons and policing, including the policing that happens 24 hours behind bars, as detailed in devastating ways by formerly incarcerated and currently incarcerated people. So I'll stop there for now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Colby. So now we'll pass it over to Mizue to introduce yourself and your work.
Hi, thank you, Colby and Bennu, for sharing your work, and thanks for having me in this space. My name is Mizue Aizeki. I work at Immigrant Defense Project. I'm based in New York. And my work there is focused on ending ICE policing, but also the police to deportation pipeline. And a key part of this work, especially over the past 10 years or so, has been trying to disrupt, effectively how ICE has merged with the criminal legal system, using police as what they call a force multiplier, but as well also just increasingly adopting the language and logics and practices of the PIC. And so, the way that we've been really challenged to fight in terms of ICE policing as it's evolved, which is, a relatively new phenomenon as we, DHS was formed not quite yet 20 years ago, right? The Department of Homeland Security. And so in many ways, it's come a long way, I guess, in the past 20 years, because obviously building on logics and practices of decades and centuries. But just talking about the work, how we experienced ICE kind of right before the pandemic and during, as you guys may recall, Trump was the president, and one of his big initiatives, I guess, was to target cities and jurisdictions that had policies that protected immigrants somewhat from being police-ICE collaboration. And New York was a big target for Trump. And so, starting in early January, we had a big increase, I think more than 400% in ICE raids in the city. Also, we had an undercover ICE agent shoot somebody in the face, a bystander in the face in Brooklyn. We heard then DHS was conducting a 24/7 surveillance operation that they called Operation Palladium, where they were getting ICE agents from all over the country to go to specific cities to round up as many people as they could, including threatening to bring in the Border Patrol's tactical team, BORTAC, to boost the presence of ICE in the city. We had, ICE carrying assault weapons into buildings on the streets in the Bronx. And if it wasn't clear sufficiently before COVID how ICE regarded the lives of people it targets, it became very clear under the pandemic. And as soon as the city or the state kind of shut down around New York, ICE announced it would continue targeting people that they called mission critical targets, which are, the people with criminal convictions, largely, that they call a public safety threat. And so as New York was rolling out these, COVID-19 zones, ICE was taking advantage of people being stuck at home and conducting ICE raids at that time, pretending often to be local police. And then, what we did see also during that time was a decrease in ICE raids, but not a increasing release of people from detention. So I think the statistic was the level of COVID-19 and ICE prisons in February was 13 times higher than outside in the general population. And ICE's response to that was to either move people from facility to facility or to deport them, right? So I think you all have heard that ICE continued deportations with people with COVID to Haiti, El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras, Mexico, and elsewhere. You know, our work has to be fought at multiple levels because ICE is a federal agency. There is, you know, I think depending on who is the president, it presents different challenges and possibilities. A lot of our work is on the New York City and New York State level, where we try to challenge surveillance, ICE police surveillance, which leads into ICE surveillance, including the NYPD's gang and DNA databases. Because as you may know, ICE also heavily relies on these gang databases and is also building up a very large, one of the world's largest biometric databases. We also, you know, we passed a law in New York last year, which was limiting ICE arrests at courthouses, which is a tactic that they picked up very much under Trump. You know, we've been working with people inside the New York State prisons to challenge the, I guess, prison to deportation pipeline that's become very entrenched in New York State over the past 30 years. And in terms of fighting to get people out of New York State prisons and out of ICE detention during COVID, it was very challenging, right? I think we didn't see a lot of releases under Governor Cuomo for people in New York State prisons. And the way that ICE dealt with people in detention, I had mentioned earlier, moving people around and deporting them. And, you know, oftentimes when people would win release because they were able to have often a legal team, you know, ICE would figure out a way around it. When there were court orders ordering ICE to release people, they would drag their feet. They would transfer people to different facilities or just deport them or put people under a form of home confinement. So that's kind of the snapshot of what last year looked like. You know, and I think we all also know that ICE was a presence at a lot of the protests in cities across the country. And, you know, as I started just reflecting on this point of DHS isn't that old as an agency. You know, Trump was only the third president to oversee DHS, and now Biden is the fourth. And I think, you know, when we think about this massive apparatus that has grown up around them, that it's just not a domestic enterprise, it's also global in scale. And so, you know, one of the things that we are looking forward to or looking towards to challenge, right, is how, you know, whether it's a physical wall or a surveillance-driven tech wall, you know, how is it that we can continue to dislodge kind of the logic and the justification that certain people are legitimate targets for perpetual punishment and exclusion. And so that's the work that we do. I hope that made sense.
It did, and thank you so much for sharing. So now I will pass it over to Sheila Nazad from Reclaim the Block.
Hello, everyone. So good to be with you. My phone just buzzed, giving the curfew alert here in Minneapolis. Very festive. Didn't know that was happening. Hi, my name is Sheila. I use she, her pronouns. I work for Reclaim the Block, which is an organization here in Minneapolis focused on moving money out of the Minneapolis Police Department and into what keeps our communities really safe. So we've been around for 3 years and had some great wins in the first 2 years and then really scaled up after the murder of George Floyd. This past year, we led a defund campaign around our city budget and got the first cut in at least 20 years to the Minneapolis Police Department budget, cutting 15% of the budget, and more importantly, cutting 22 positions that were sort of like community policing positions, got them out of the police department. Yeah, so that was really great. And currently, we are focused on a campaign to change our city charter, which is essentially our city constitution. And it right now requires that we have a police department with a certain number of officers per resident of Minneapolis. So we are leading with a coalition called Yes for Minneapolis, a ballot amendment campaign that would strike the police department as a required department and replace it with a Department of Public Safety that opens up the path for violence prevention, public health driven transformative justice strategies to become the primary strategies for creating safety and addressing harm in Minneapolis. So that is our current campaign. And yeah, to ground us in this current moment, we're in active protest right now after the murder of Dante Wright in Brooklyn Center, which is just borders Minneapolis. And we've been holding a lot of space for that and also celebrating the resilience of community that we've seen rise up over the last year. And, you know, I was out there last night and folks are really taking care of one another, and it's very inspiring. So I will leave it there for now.
Thank you so much, Sheila. And last but not least, I'll pass it over to Hamid Khan from the Stop LAPD Spying in California.
Thank you, Woods, and greetings, everybody. My name is Hamid. We'll go by he, him with Stop LAPD Spying Coalition, calling in from Long Beach, California. And happy to be in this conversation. So the coalition has been around for about a little over 10 years now in Los Angeles. And I've been organizing in LA for, gosh, I'm going to age myself, for about over 3 decades. I was involved in the startup of South Asian Network, and then we're also involved with the LA Taxi Workers Alliance. And then in 2010, started looking at how rapidly the counterinsurgency and counterterrorism tactics were being incorporated into local policing, which was nothing new. We'd seen that expansion historically post-Vietnam, but with the advent of technology, that how these technologies and these material-based, where historically there was still the human-based. So whenever people say the surveillance technology, I kind of just take a pause, because it is about carceral technologies, and human-based surveillance is still the primary focus on how information is gathered and how infiltration happens and how surveillance and spying takes place as well. But it was very clear that now when we hear about things like stingrays and Palantir and digital receiver technology and this, that, and the other, these were all developed by the US Navy and the US Marine Corps to be used on the battlefronts of Iraq and Afghanistan. So that led to a group of folks who historically, the folks like myself and folks at the Los Angeles Community Action Network, Youth Justice Coalition, and various other groups came together and started looking at these programs and these technologies, that how and what would be the impact, particularly as they start masking the same racist impact, same level of racial profiling, but now with the veneer of science and using this language of neutrality, because computers are neutral, which was just a really bogus claim. So that's really what brought us together. But one of the things that from the get-go that we were able to do was to really start challenging the conventional understanding around surveillance as well, which has been traditionally around the invasion of privacy. And when you look at the invasion of privacy, it really kind of just sanitizes the impact, because in a way, while privacy is absolutely very critical to all of us, but the question is that who can even claim that privacy? You know, when you're looking at white supremacy and settler colonialism and patriarchy and capitalism, then so many bodies really are bared, constantly laid bare, and being rooted and grounded in Skid Row in downtown Los Angeles. It was very clear that the whole narrative had to shift. And we started looking at surveillance as how race and poverty and suspect bodies are policed, and where surveillance becomes the tip of that policing knife, where increasingly now it's becoming almost like from a birth to prison pipeline, where surveillance and information gathering becomes the key tool that how communities become criminalized and how they're contained and how people are being traced and tracked and monitored. So we started mapping out the various programs, and one of the things that we mapped out was really kind of looking at surveillance through this lens of the stalker state, that how information really moves within various sectors, that how information from public sector to private sector to law enforcement to corporations and various other systems constantly moves. So in a way, how our bodies are being constantly datafied, and our existence has been turned into a gazillion different data points, where each one of them is there to be picked up and almost recreate our being. It's not just about, being on the computer and all of a sudden, your favorite tennis shoes shows up, or, or favorite restaurant shows up. So people are like, well, how did they figure out that, I was thinking about that? There's a whole methodology behind that how information moves and how information systems are created. And more recently, we did a whole report, and giving an example on a public sector agency on DCFS, on Department of Children and Family Services, which one would think is a safety net type of protection. But here's the level of information sharing that happens just within a county sector, a county program, which is supposed to provide a safety net for families and children. So here ICE is involved, and DHS is involved, and DOJ is involved, Department of Justice, and all the federal agencies, and Social Security Administration, IRS, Housing and Urban Development. So the point for us was to really kind of just re-looking at surveillance through a much more broader lens, rather than just like, just this very sort of a narrow focus that our phones are being tapped, or we're being, and of course, all of that is happening as well. And then started looking at various programs, and we were able to successfully organize. And our goal was really not to seek remedies through the court systems, because typically what happens is that, historically speaking, we've seen that, that cases are created, go to the federal courts, but things remain the same. Our goal was to really bring this conversation on surveillance down to the ground level, and really for the communities to start looking at it, that how does it impact our lives? And as a result of that, about building that power, we were able to successfully dismantle the Los Angeles Police Department's predictive policing programs, their Operation Laser, chronic offender program. And now we are at that stage, and we'll be releasing a report, and then also we have a couple of folks from Critical Resistance also involved in that as well, on looking at the intersection of land and surveillance and policing. That how these programs like predictive policing and how these programs like predictive analytics and risk assessment tools are directly linked to removal of people from land, how gentrification and development is directly linked to this thing, and it's really bringing in the various agencies like the city attorney's office, the city council, real estate developers, that how LAPD and policing and these types of technologies and these programs, which are used or claimed as giving more efficiency to policing and management of resources, are really another tool of extreme harm, and with the intent to cause harm, how these technologies are being unleashed, and people are being banished from their neighborhoods as well. So in essence, when we talk about abolition of policing, it's the abolition of surveillance technologies. It's not just about it's through the invasion of privacy, but this is about the intent to cause harm. This is about that how these technologies in a very methodological way are being unleashed on our communities, and how people are constantly being criminalized as a result, which creates more and more pathways to incarceration. So the goal is to really shift these carceral technologies, and what does abolition mean, and how do we start building more towards a practice of abolition, and embody those practices as well, to defund and to ultimately get rid of these and dismantle these structures. So I'll stop right there, and happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Hamid. Um, so before I put you all a little bit in conversation with each other, I wanted to circle back to Bennu and ask if you wanted to. I think you gave us a really great brief snapshot of National Freedom Movement in your work. If you wanted to share anything else to get us started.
Yeah, thank you. The National Freedom Movement, what we're doing, is an inside-out coalition, just like what many of you all are already working on. And our emphasis is on finding outside organizations to help us organize and unify the inside around the nation. And we want to build an infrastructure from scratch where our outside support organizers and organizations, they start from the very beginning, structuring themselves to support the inside and support the inside unification that we're working on. And by that, I mean, we want to get some office space, and we want to get a collect phone line. We want to get computers, and we want to create files, emergency contacts for people on the inside who are organizing, so that we can keep track of people and circumstances as people continue to move around the system. But also just to keep people updated on the work, because it's very easy to get lost inside of the system. And so what we learned over the last year as we've been working to build the National Freedom Movement is that there are a lot of organizations out there that do work in criminal justice reform or abolition work, but that's not their priority, or that's not the only thing that they do. We're just a part of something. And so what I feel like is important for us on the inside is that we have to have an independent structure inside and out that represents our interests and our voice. And then we interact with others on whatever level they come to support us. So that's just one of the things I just wanted to say. And on another level, one of the programs that we're putting together, and I heard Ms. Nazad, Sheila Nazad say reclaiming the block. We're working on a program called Adopt the Block. And people probably have heard the term $1 million block before. And so in Michelle Alexander's book, I think that's where I got introduced to it. So we want to map all of these blocks that have been targeted and just kind of look at a lot of the communities and areas that have been targeted for the PIC, the PSIC, the Prison Slavery Industrialized Complex. And we want to get those mappings because these are blocks that we want to go in, and we want to put resources in them also. We want to put $1 million worth of resources into these blocks as far as basic training, financial management, job training, assistance with getting trademarks, just all of the different services. We want to get volunteer attorneys and whatnot. We want to adopt a block in the community, and at the same time, we want to adopt a block on the inside of a prison. We want to adopt, if it's a housing unit, if it's a solitary confinement unit, if it's a general population area, but we want to get organizations to adopt the whole block and then provide resources into that community, whether it be with canteen or stationery or typing assistance, just whatever the needs are in that particular area. And we're sponsoring community events, and we found an organization, they're going to sponsor a community event for us. We're going to do a barbecue in a community that we're going to adopt on the outside. Then we're going to do a canteen purchase and create meals for the block that they're going to adopt on the inside. And we want to try to replicate that throughout different prisons and throughout different communities. But we want to start in the solitary confinement units because these are the areas where the time is the most difficult. There are a lot of people with a lot of different kind of needs in these solitary confinement units, and they're putting together a little mental health curriculum, just to engage people. But we don't want it to be a one-off. We don't want it to be the normal letter writing campaign. We want people to actually develop a relationship with the block, and for that relationship to never cease. No matter who moves in, as the block transitions and people move in and out of the block, we want someone to have a relationship with that community inside of that block. And so I appreciate that. I just wanted to add those things out there because those are the main things that we're working on with our organizing right now, is to getting that national alliance put together, and then to get this Adopt the Block campaign up and running so that the communities will be strengthened and have the ability to fight back against some of that. Thank you.
All right. So thank you so much, Bennu. And now we'll go into a little bit of question and answer so that you all can have a little conversation. I'm gonna start us off with a question around COVID-19. And this question is, I'm gonna direct it towards Colby and Bennu, but other folks are also welcome to answer as well. So we're 1 year into a dire public health crisis that is international in scope and felt acutely in every location in the United States. Can we dig a little bit deeper into the health aspect? How has your organizing been impacted, or how does it intersect more broadly with COVID? So whether it's through how your folks are your organizing with are impacted, or how your organizing methods or tactics are being adapted, or any direct demands that you've made. Could you talk a little bit more about that? And since Bennu just spoke, I'll start with Colby, if that's okay.
Sure, thanks, Woods. Yeah, I think it's COVID has affected all of our work in intense ways. Obviously, in the last year, it's been devastating and incredibly busy, and incredibly stressful. And that's from the outside, right? So, but our communication, I'm speaking across, CCWP, with incarcerated people, it's already a constant for us, but it's been so amped up during COVID, right? Because people are desperately trying to survive inside without very little information, with with total disregard from the prison system, obviously, in terms of whether they live or die, whether they contract COVID, and when they do, how they survive it, right? So we all know that prisons and all forms of prisons are a public health nightmare. And so a pandemic on top of that has just taken things to such extreme levels. And I will say, in terms of our organizing work, I think one of the things that that shifted inside and out for us is over the last year, and I know that this has been true nationally too, is more work on direct mutual aid, material aid, getting funds into people to survive the time, to share with others to survive the time, increasing that, especially when our members got COVID and were sent to COVID quarantine. People were deprived of food, were given moldy food, just getting resources in there for people to survive, while we worked with so many other, organizations and people beyond the women's prisons to fight for mass releases. So I think, that kind of direct survival piece has always been a part of CCWP since it started inside in the 90s. But this period of time has, both given us the opportunity to receive more funds, honestly, to direct to incarcerated people, which has never been the case before this period of time. And, given the, through all the organizing inside and the inside-outside organizing, created more of a platform for people to speak out about the ongoing health conditions in there, both created by COVID and also preceding COVID. And then the other thing I'll just mention real quick is something Bennu said made me think of this, is that it's given us an opportunity on CCWP on the outside to also see the kinds of mutual aid networks that people, it's not the first opportunity to see that, right? But under these most terrible conditions, the kinds of networks that people have created inside, and that people also increased inside to keep each other as safe as possible to survive COVID and to fight for release too. So just these kind of networks of support, of information sharing, of literally food sharing, of communicating with other people's family members if somebody can't reach the phone, communicating with us so that we can add that information into the fight for their release. All of these kind of complex networks that both increased during COVID, and also I think COVID kind of revealed more of how essential that kind of mutual aid network and care is to supporting people's survival and chance at release. So I'll end there.
Thank you, Colby. And I'll ask the same question of Bennu. Yes, can you tell us a little bit about how your organizing currently is intersected with COVID? How are you all moving given the conditions inside?
Okay. The thing with COVID, like we didn't have information. Like we don't have access to information. We don't have access to computers. We didn't have any of that stuff. And so there were so many unknowns about the disease. So I think that the first thing that we had to address was the panic. And then we had to address the mental health wear and tear from the stress of going through this every day and seeing that the commissioners and the politicians, that no one cared. So our first reaction was not even to the pandemic itself. It was to the mental aspect of what was going on and how that was impacting the prison. Now, at the time that all of that was going on, we were in the midst of the Department of Justice has filed a lawsuit against the entire Alabama prison system because it had a culture of violence. And so also within that, they talked about the drug epidemic that was going on. So I think that people have to understand that we were dealing with a drug epidemic at a time when the system was so overcrowded, like there was nothing that we could do. Like we couldn't get to cleaning supply. We couldn't control movements and we couldn't control behaviors because people were, the drug issue had taken over the prison. And so we were just, like I said, we were in survival mode until we figured out and was able to finally get more information about what COVID, what it is and what it's not. It went through the phase of whether or not it was airborne, and there were just so many things floating around, and it only takes a small bit of information to get dropped off into a closed environment. And that information, you may never be able to undo the impact of. So just COVID itself, I would say even today, we still really haven't had a strategy to deal with it, just from the COVID aspect itself, because of all of the other issues that surrounded it, it just made it impossible for us. As far as organizing and stuff go, I mean, our organizing shifted from the platforms that we already had. We had to literally shift to, we became mental health counselors. I mean, and I don't want to just keep harping on that or overemphasize that, but like that was the reality that I saw. Like I didn't see, we didn't have protests at the prisons like we normally do. We couldn't protest at Capitol like we normally did. And then we need to remember that we're already malnourished. We have contaminated water supply. We have contaminated food supply, and the soils that most of these places are contaminated. So our bodies were already not healthy enough to deal with the pandemic. And then, so now we have this issue of, are we healthy enough to even deal with the vaccines? Like, we don't know what the side effects are. They don't give us that type of information. They give us basic information. Wash your hands, use soap. They talk about bleach and stuff, but they don't provide those things. So our burden with COVID-19, like we just got through it by faith, really. We didn't really have a solution because we didn't have the resources. We couldn't order PPEs. We couldn't get those things shipped in, and we didn't have that type of access. And that right there just impacted the way that people dealt with each other on the inside. And so we had to be in that mediation and crisis management mode more so than anything as far as the pandemic was concerned.
Thank you so much for that answer, Bennu. Yeah, I think the work of maintaining those organizing relationships and making sure to take care of people so that folks get what they need as best as you can make go under those conditions. So important. Does anyone else have want to answer that question, or do you have any follow-ups for Colby or Bennu?
I could quickly just share about COVID related, because what we have is now that looking at public health as a key component of the stalker state, and that how information sharing and how data is being collected and data is being harvested as a result, and what are we looking at some long-term implications. So for us, so we've been working with some public health folks as well, as to kind of map out that what are the ways that information is moving, what is going to be the role of these immunity passports, if you will, like CDC certificates, that who has access, who doesn't, who's in, who's not. And especially when we have technologies like Palantir, who have been central to to mass deportation of people, mass criminalization within the criminal justice system, data harvesting. I mean, there's something that is rooted in the CIA and Department of Defense is now being used, and Palantir has an exclusive contract with Health and Human Services. HHS Protect is the one multi-million-dollar contract that they have. So I think it becomes really crucial, for at least for our work as well. And we've been doing these webinars on the regular. I mean, COVID did impact our organizing out of the street and door knocking and various other things, and doing street presentations and speaking to folks around surveillance. But we had to step back and then start doing some online organizing. And today is actually our 53rd webinar since March 24th. We've been having it every Tuesday, taking a couple of Tuesdays off over the last 12 months. But on the regular, having these things and keeping on speaking about these things. But I think the big concern is that how this data collection and data harvesting as a result of COVID, what sort of long-term implication is it going to have on where now these apps are now on phones as well, as to location. So now it's not just about geolocation on your phones, it's just about all the information that we're getting just trying to stay healthy. How that is now going in the hands, and how that'll be abused, and furthermore to control and contain and trace and track and stalk people.
Thank you for that, Hamid. Yes, it's just, we're up against some pretty difficult circumstances. I don't, as you all know, just the ways in which this crisis manifests, and we have to organize in response, and there's actually very little federal relief, and then how we access some of those things oftentimes are either held up by the prison industrial complex or infiltrated to spread it. So I'm going to, if folks don't have any other questions, or if you don't want to ask questions of each other on this particular topic, I can move on to the next one. Since this is going to be about our recent change to in presidents, so since the November election, ushering in a new presidential administration, we've witnessed the continuation of rampant militarism, imprisonment, surveillance, and policing. What impact, if any, is this having locally or in your organizing campaigns? And how do you anticipate your local landscape continuing to shift? And how are you addressing these changes? And I will start us off with Mizue, if you could answer that question.
That's a big question. I'll try to answer it concisely. I think in many ways, on most of the issues that we fight, there's always a lot of consensus, right, between the Democrats and Republicans. And, I think like this around the immigration and migration issue, where that consensus is really clear, especially, over the past 20, 30 years, is around, the border, sealing and militarizing the border, as well as you know, the use of police as a force multiplier, right? So the police deportation pipeline, because the idea that the group of people who are not belonging or not worthy of protection, very conveniently building off of the PIC, are people with criminal convictions or criminal contact. And so those are the things that stay the same. That said, you know, Trump was terrible. Right. And I think there was a lot of harm. There's a lot of harm that can be done by a president that's clear. And, you know, we haven't had an immigration law that expanded the rights of immigrants in over 35 years in this country. Right. So when people talk about like the 12 million people who are undocumented, that's because there's barely any way for people to get any kind of legal status. And that has become harder and harder. And so, you know, what we continue to face, whether it's George Bush, you know, George, which was the second one, W. Bush, or Obama, Trump, and Biden now, is there's always this trade-off, right? If there's a possibility for immigration reform, it's going to be the carrot, which will be some kind of legal status for some, and the stick being, you know, fortifying the border even more, and denying and barring people and legitimating deportation of people with criminal convictions. And so, you know, all this to say, we're building off, like all of our work, there's a lot of damage and a lot of harm. I think the, you know, the precarity of labor, you know, that is a consequence and a goal, right, of a border policing regime, meaning people having less rights to fight, is clear and has, you know, definitely over the past decades been worn out. And now we have this policing apparatus that's larger than the militaries of, I think, Canada, or close to it. I can't remember the statistics, but, you know, and there's a huge investment in policing, surveilling, and locking up people, keeping them out. And so, you know, at the same time, I think that the work that, you know, people have been doing around abolition, around the PIC, and, you know, all the uprisings and protests last year have had an impact, right? I think, you know, people heard of people saying abolish ICE, abolish DHS. And that's the political space that we're continuing to try to push open. But, you know, I think part of the challenge that we will continue to face too is that, as I said earlier, this is not just a domestic fight. It's really, it's an international fight, right? Like neoliberalism knows no boundaries. And also, you know, DHS, I think, has something like 52 offices across the globe. You know, I heard today, and we know that this is happening, that Biden is pressuring, or the administration is trying to work with countries right in Central America to police migrants and prevent people from migrating. And, you know, they're tying kind of aid to those countries to their ability to police their borders. And so, you know, this is why in the work that we're doing, it has to be very local, but also operate, you know, on many scales internationally as well.
Thank you, Mizue. Is anyone else interested in answering this question about
I wanted to speak on it briefly.
Go for it.
For us on the inside, I think that President Biden offers us a unique opportunity. Now, how we seize it and capitalize of it to utilize maximum, I can't answer. But we started like workshops and small work groups and a research team to actually pull those bills down and look at them and examine everything that went into these crime bills and whatnot. With him being like the symbol or the figurehead occupying the White House, it gives us a target. It gives us someone to point to organize around, to organize around these issues. We've been talking about mobilizing people around these issues to Washington, D.C. and setting up encampments up there and building relationships and whatnot. But just from the practical point of having Joe Biden in the White House, it does give us, because like a lot of the crime bill stuff is associated with him, it's appointed to him, and some of the policies and stuff like that. And so for us on the inside, like things that may work for outside organization stuff, it works a little different in here as far as how do we get people's attention, how do we maintain their interest and whatnot. So the best thing that we've gotten out of it was like leading up to the campaign, and people always hollering, you know, Jim Crow Joe, and pointing out the crime bill, the crime bill, the crime bill. It actually gave us an opportunity to pull the crime bill down, to put a research team together, and people started finding out that a lot of the stuff in the crime bill carry mandates with it to carry it in the stick, so to speak, that force states to pass particular laws. And so now it has opened up an opportunity for us to put voting blocks together and for people to figure out ways to strategically use the vote. Because now they understand that the person who started this process, or who is attributed to, or someone we can attribute it to, he's sitting right there. So that's one of the things that it did give us. There was also a question in a Q&A panel. She asked about what can they do to get involved to assist Free Alabama movement. You can reach out to us by email at freealabamamovement@gmail.com. And since we're running short on time, I don't want to take up any more time on the panel than I have to, but just get in contact with us. And the main thing, like this is our number one priority. When we started this movement, we started out organizing work strike, boycotts, protests, and social media campaigns. In 2016, we led the largest nationwide work strike in U.S. history. Over 24 states, over 30,000 people participated. And what we want to make sure that people do is to understand that the economics of the labor, the economics and the collect phone calls and the exorbitant canteen prices and whatnot, like this is where we have our most power inside of the system. When we shut down these industries, when we shut down these factories, when we shut down these private investors that invest, because they're only here for one reason. They're here to make money. And if they weren't making money, then that'll run more of these people from the table. We see the campaign against the Detroit Pistons owner who owns Securus Technology. Like, we want to boycott Securus Technology. We want to boycott these phones. And that's what the Adopt the Block campaign will allow us to do. It'll allow us to create communication lines so that people will be able to get off the phone. We'll have stamps and stationery coming in and out of prison so people can write letters. But the only way to run these people from the table is to put them out of business. And any manufacturing company that has products that are being made on the inside of these prisons, we want to identify them. We want to educate family members on how their contributions. Every time you send money through JPay or whatever the service is, they charge a fee. Every time your loved one receives that money, the institutions charge 2 or 3 different types of fees. The only way to stop that exploitation is to come up with a strategy to stop sending the money. We have to cut back on the way that we're supporting the system, because this is how the system maintains its existence. And this is where when the snakes come in, like this is what they're here for. And so we have to run them away from the table. So we have to discuss labor. We have to get people to understand labor, and we have to get people to understand how that collect phone call and that money on canteen it's a temporary salve. It has someone okay in the moment, but long term, it works against them, because you keep talking and talking and talking, and the profits just keep adding up, and these people are not going away. So that's the thing that we want to focus on, is the economics of how this thing is put together, and our role in being complicit in it, and what we can do to organize against that.
Thank you so much, Bennu, and I really appreciate you lifting out the role of capitalism and how that plays a role in the prison industrial complex. And speaking of thinking about funds and how we could potentially reroute funds, so I'm gonna direct this question at Sheila. So from the beginning of the pandemic, there have been times of increased opportunity for anti-PIC organizing wins, as well as moments of intense repression by the PIC. So what opportunities, can you tell us more about the opportunities or setbacks your organizing has encountered while you've encountered and ways in which you were able to respond creatively? And were there surprising or especially impactful creative actions or tactics that you took? And I think you can be expansive about how we use the word creative.
Great, I love it, wonderful. So one thing, speaking of capitalism, that happened is our organization, which before the pandemic, we were 12 people who met in a living room twice a month and organized campaigns. And we raised a tremendous amount of money, came in during the uprising in May and June. So we received around $31 million between our organization and Black Visions. So we got retweeted by Rihanna basically and Beyonce, and it just cascaded from there. And so what we had to do, and I think this is a lesson for any city, if you've been in that has had an uprising, I know it happened in Ferguson as well. A few organizations get posted on social media and a ton of funds come in and there's not the infrastructure to redistribute it. So what we did is we set up our partner organization, Black Visions, set up a fund called the Transformative Black Movement Fund. And we put the money in there to go out into community at different levels. A certain amount was for direct mutual aid. Some of it was for healing. Some of it was for Black business development. Some was for general abolition movement infrastructure building. And within a few months, we had gotten out $7 million to community. And that required a lot of creativity, right? That's more than philanthropy here distributed in that time for sure. And on another creative note, so many of you have probably seen the video of our mayor, Jacob Fry, being shamed in front of his condo when he was asked, will he commit to defund the police? So the other part is that was on my birthday. What a birthday gift. So, but the thing that I want to capture that's beyond that moment, so we had a lot of fires here, a diversity of tactics happening, and the dominant media narrative was Minneapolis is destruction, right? And there was no coverage of the resilience and community building that was also happening, right? So what we did is we held this march in the middle of the day, and there was music and there was dancing and there was space for joy and healing and an opportunity for accountability for our mayor, which he chose to decline. And for me, that was a moment where I felt like we were helping shift expand the narrative, I'll say, not shift it, right? Because we need a diversity of tactics. So that is one thing that we decided to do. And the other kind of iconic moment was when we got 9 of our city council members to go up on a stage and commit to defunding the police, which of course has not happened, right? But what we did intentionally is we wrote the commitments that we wanted them to say, which included the Minneapolis Police Department cannot be reformed. We put them on giant banners and we made the council members stand behind those banners while our people held them up. And again, putting the community first. And although we haven't, the Minneapolis police still exist today, but what it did is change the baseline of the conversation. It was no longer, oh, we need reform while activists are calling for defund. It was, we need defund while activists are calling for abolition, right? And change the level of accountability. Yeah, I'll stop there.
Thank you so much, Sheila. That's super inspiring. I would also like to direct that question to Mizue. Just thinking about the courthouse protections legislation. So how did you engage in grassroots or everyday people's needs experiences in that work as well?
Well, the thing that happened after Trump took office, as I mentioned, there was a big shift, tactical shift by ICE, targeting people attending New York State courthouses. And I think we over the 3 years, it was about a 1,400% increase in ICE activity there. And I think I like how, Sheila, how you ended your thing, changing the baseline. Honestly, one of the things that was really the reason why ICE targeted the courthouses was because I think they banked or basically were really pushing this politics that these are people that don't deserve protections because they have criminal convictions or they're in criminal proceedings. And, a lot of our work I think it was a campaign that involved a lot of different stakeholders and some very tactical allies, not strategic allies, in terms of some judges, even some district attorneys, and that was uncomfortable. But, part of what we really pushed in terms of our campaign work was making sure there wasn't a carve out, right? There was a lot of people like in power said, well, we are primarily concerned about people going to family court or some of the trafficking courts, and not necessarily the criminal courts. And so I don't know, Woods, if this is getting to your question in terms of the people's needs, but, I think part of what ICE banks on is like, the vulnerability of people to the state, right? You're mandated by the state to attend a court proceeding. Once you start exercising your rights in your home, which, ICE themselves had said this, people are getting better about knowing their rights in their home. So we have to go out and arrest them in their car, on the street, on their way at court. And, as a population of people to build with and organize, it's difficult for people, right? I think, in terms of the especially under Trump, there was just a tremendous amount of fear and a lot of loss. And it's not really a system that offers very much protection to anybody. So I think the victory here was ICE is so disgusting. Winning a New York state is not a progressive state, even though it's a Democratic state. It was the first bill, I think, nationally, maybe other than California might have one. No, yes, to limit explicitly ICE targeting people at courthouses. And I think within that, I don't know, I'll stop there, but I don't know, Woods, if you had a particular question you wanted me to engage. I just kind of went off on my thing.
No, that was great. Thank you so much for sharing. I would now like to open it up for each one of you to maybe share one lesson. Try and like crystallize it. Pick one like lesson or tactic or approach that you have learned about this last year that maybe you want to share with our audience, in that has impacted your organizing. So please share your wisdom with us, so we can replicate and learn. So is there someone who would like to start us off on maybe just one like gem you have for us to take away?
I can start. My gem offering is Train the trainers. We did a bunch of train the trainers on how to get involved in our city budget process, and that let us reach so many more people and get that first cut in 20 years. So train the trainers, spread your movement.
We unfortunately had to lose Colby, but thank you so much. We'll just pass it around if someone else want to share.
Okay, I like that train the trainers. The one thing that I learned most important is that we have to engage the community. Like, we can't solve this problem without the communities being made a part of the solution. And I'm just speaking for Alabama, because that's something that we hadn't done in Free Alabama Movement. Like 100% of our organizing was on the inside. And now I'm learning that the communities where people come from is a powerful, powerful part of this community on the inside. And so this past last weekend, we had our first event where we actually went into a community as part of our Adopt the Block, this introduction. And it's already just, it was everything that it was everything we imagined it would be, and then it was so much more. And so that's the thing I would say, is just like, when we attacking this problem, like, understand that the people on the inside live in the community when we're using that word, and the communities that people come from, like, we have to do a better job of understanding that these communities have been destabilized by the war on drugs. They are occupied communities, and that we have to go in there. Like, I've met so many organizations and people that don't have a presence in the communities that we're all talking about. And so, like, that's the thing that I want to emphasize, is that let's bring these communities together. We have shared experiences. The problems are almost the same, and just there's so many things in common. And I think that we need to connect these communities with the communities on the inside, and to create a power base from that structure right there.
Thank you, Bennu. Does anybody else want to share one thing you learned, or one gem or tactic?
I have something, unless Hamid, you want to go? I think I would say just never give up and keep on fighting. Last year, right before the pandemic, actually, we were working with someone who was in one of the New York State prisons, who got parole after serving 25 years. And, the way the prison system works is they work very closely with ICE, right? So for most people, if you get parole, that means you go to ICE detention and get deported. And so what we were able to do, working with a whole lot of people, but also the person himself was just really an incredible advocate, was we had a pardon. We had a pardon in front of the governor. We had a appeal with immigration to overturn his deportation. He got the pardon when he was the day before, hours before he was about to be put on a plane back to a place that he hadn't lived for like 40 years. And we won. So we got him off the plane. And he got himself off the plane. It wasn't just it was a big we. And then he also, in that space, was able to get someone else from being deported by communicating to him something he wouldn't have known otherwise. And then, even though ICE held him for 3 weeks, still in detention, he's now out. And so that is a gem, I think. So keep fighting and throw a lot of stuff at the wall.
That right there. Yeah, keep fighting and throwing. And I think, just echoing everything that Sheila and Bennu and Mizue said, just one of the things that, and I don't know whether it's a gem or out of necessity, that we had to really pivot. And as we were always out there organizing in the street, our main base is in Skid Row, so we would have people every Tuesday. We would have a meeting at LA Can in the Freedom Room, and folks would be coming out from different spaces, but also literally coming out of their tents and participating, and various sectors of the community would be a part of that. But now with COVID, we had to really pivot, and so we started these online webinars, meetings every Tuesday, and just continued on. And yeah, I mean, obviously, as an organization that really is fighting surveillance and spying and infiltration, digital security is a key thing. But for us, that was never really a top priority, because quite frankly, our bases or folks that we organized with didn't really have technology. So many of us are old school. I don't even know what a PGP key is. So we didn't want to make it complicated for our communities to have encrypted this and encrypted that. We still use Gmail, we still use Google Docs, and I think for us it was crucial. And we use Zoom as well. We tried some other Mumble and some of these other things, but we were not able to reach out to folks. And it was creating a technological hardship. But yet at the same time, maintain that consistency, that frequency of conversation every Tuesday, and make each one of those webinars more nuanced as well, looking at the intersection of surveillance and gender and sexuality. Another week looking at the intersection of the war on youth, then data-driven policing, and various other things. So as a result, like I said, today is our webinar part 53, and we've been doing that. And hopefully, just we'll be able to get back on the streets again. But in the meantime, work has to continue, and you keep on throwing stuff at the wall, and keep on building that power. So, yeah.
Thank you so much, Hamid. So in our last few minutes, I know, Hamid, you've shared about the wonderful webinar Stop LAPD Spying is doing. Sheila, you talked a little bit about changing the city charter. Bennu, you talked about the $1 million blocks and working inside and outside of the community. I just wanted to see if there were any last, these are what we're thinking about looking forward in our organizing in the next year or so. Because we're gonna, as you all said, we're gonna keep building. We're gonna keep creatively trying. We're gonna keep making it go. If there are any last, any last words about the work looking forward? Okay.
No one's going to say. I guess what I will say is, and everyone can do this in every city they're in, is, one of the things that we're fighting right now is the ICE priority enforcement memo. I don't know if anyone knows if people know what that is. But basically under each administration, since Obama, they issue a memo which says who's a priority for targeting for ICE policing. And currently it's under consideration in terms of who's going to be the permanent memo. There's a temporary memo in place right now, but it targets people with a very broad range of criminal convictions. It just posted it in, which includes a category called an aggravated felony, which is a made up category for immigration law, which encompasses a very wide range of convictions. Many of them are not aggravated or felonies, but even if they were, we would say that it was clearly a law that was designed to make it as easy as possible for ICE to detain, mandatorily imprison people, and mandatorily deport them, and also exclude them from returning. And so that's one category in there. There's another one which includes ICE making a determination on someone's gang affiliation if they participated in a gang, and we all know how that story goes. And so the things that we're doing is, supporting people who are targeted by ICE, and building case campaigns around them, and advocating for them to kind of push back against, the carceral state logics and the criminalization of particular people. But, I think, Bennu said, there is a possibility, right? There is a difference right now, I think, with Biden, and in terms of how they're trying to position themselves as being different and better and kinder than the Trump administration. So I just would encourage people, if they have that, if they're interested, to support those kinds of fights.
Thank you so much, Mizue. All right, so it looks like it is time. We will definitely, I think we will all hopefully bring all of these learnings into our work moving forward. I know we definitely will at Critical Resistance. For instance, like we'll bring those into the current campaigns that we have moving forward. Some of the campaigns we're working on right now, like CR Oakland is currently organizing in the Defund OPD coalition, which just recently had a positive development where 33 of our 35 priority recommendations that move resources away from policing and towards life-giving services were passed by the Oakland Reimagined Task Force. The coalition is literally fighting right now to move that fight forward, as those recommendations are under review at this moment by the Oakland City Council Public Safety Committee. CRNYC is moving forward work in the realm of abolishing ICE, and how the connections between ICE and the jails in New York and New Jersey is part of the detention and deportation flank of the PIC, similar to the work that you're doing, Mizue. And our other chapters are pivoting after their wins last year to move toward new campaigns that push the needle forward in our fight for abolition. We're so grateful to learn from all of you all's experience, your brilliance, your wisdom, to bring to our work to propel this fight forward for abolition. Thank you, thank you. And thanks again to you, our supporters, for making this webinar possible. See you out there making this go. Thanks, everyone.